Welcome, everybody, to our Summit, Education in Transition, Reshaping America's Schools in a Post-Pandemic World. I'm Bob Sanborn, President and CEO of Children at Risk, and part of the leadership of the Texas Family Leadership Council. So we want to really welcome everyone here. We also want to thank our sponsors, our major sponsor, Shell, who's been doing this for many years, focusing on this education summit. But also we want to thank AIG and Amazon for their support of everything that we're doing here today. So we have a magnificent group of speakers, a good lineup as we go forward today. So we're very excited. Jessica, do we have some housekeeping for people that we want to go through?
Yeah, so just a few housekeeping notes. We ask that you use the QA or chat function to ask questions of any of our speakers, and we'll do our best to answer them live or in the chat after the presentation. And then if you need any technical assistance, just raise your hand and anyone from the Children at Risk staff will be able to help you. And then after the event, we will be able to share a copy of the slides and a link to the recording and any other additional resources. So thank you so much, and we look forward to having a wonderful summit with you guys.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Jessica. Thank you for all your work and the team that you put together to put together this great summit with us today. So let's talk a little bit about pandemic learning loss and its impact on our children. We have a couple of slides for you. Let's move to the next slide. Okay, did we skip one there? There we go. So what we're seeing across Texas is this significant decline. We've all heard about summer learning loss. What we're seeing is this decline in terms of pandemic learning loss. When we look at the data, what's very interesting is we do see some schools that have done better, where we've seen the school leaders, the principal, the teachers that have done really they've gone overboard in terms of engaging families, engaging students, and we see those schools actually do pretty well, sort of better than we would have expected. And this is across the range of income and family. And so we've seen this happen, but by and large, we've seen a lot of kids, a lot of our students that are sort of behind the curve and we have a lot of work to be doing. We have also seen, especially knowing that close to 70% of our children in the state of Texas are children of color, that a lot of these children are up to 6 months behind in math compared to white students who fall in about 4 months behind. So we see that there is work to do. And when we look at the entirety of this, what's real important to understand is that 1 in 10 children born in America is born here in Texas. So when we talk about these challenges in Texas, we're talking about national challenges ahead for us. When we look at teachers, we have to understand also teachers have also been adversely impacted by the pandemic. Many times we go through life thinking, well, they're teachers and they are separate from us, but they're the same as us. And we have teachers now re-questioning, what they have to do, because we need to reimagine the teaching career and understand that there's going to be this shortage of teachers. It's going to be a perpetual shortage if we don't address it now. And I think that's very important. Let's go to the next slide. So when we look at student attendance and performance, we see kids falling behind, as I mentioned, but we also see absenteeism. Kids who haven't been engaged for 2 years, especially when they've been at the high school level, are less likely to get engaged. And then I think, moreover, kids that haven't been engaged in early education are those kids that are much more likely to fall behind. What we have seen in Texas over the last decade is that when school districts, and we've seen this in the Rio Grande Valley, in Dallas and Houston, when school districts have invested in full day, high quality pre-K, those kids will do better during the school year. But what we're seeing is that without pre-K for 2 years, we're going to have a whole group of kids that are falling behind. And this goes into our next slide, talking about early education overall. And without high quality early education, which is still suffering in our state, we still have a lot of these centers that are not up to speed. We have a lot of kids that are not in high quality early education, a lot of parents who can't find high quality early education. So it becomes a continual challenge during the pandemic. So we see a lot in front of us as we go forward. And hopefully today, as we get going, we're going to be able to address some of these concerns, maybe raise some questions, but also prepare us as we get ready for the next legislative session, where interestingly, there's more money than usual. The federal government has invested more money in sort of the post-pandemic and recovery. And we need to see that as Texans, can we do the right thing and use some of the funds available for us to really get our kids back to the point where they're going to be contributors into our global economy, contributors into our vibrant Texas economy. So there is a direction forward. Let me introduce Fraser Wilson. Fraser is the VP at Shell USA, and he's a manager of the Workforce Development and Diversity Outreach. And he's one of our good friends. And Fraser, you have a few opening remarks for us. And thank you again, Fraser, for the continuing support that you and all the good folks at Shell continue to do for children at risk and for this summit.
Thanks again, Bob. Glad to have Shell as another proud year of supporting this year's summit. And just to follow up on some of the things that you've already shared in your opening remarks about the pandemic has really brought some renewed attention to some of the historical and ongoing challenges that have produced some of the economic and racial disparity in our education system. And it prevents kids from reaching their full potential. A lot more attention was brought to bear on some of these things after the George Floyd incident and the movement towards social justice. It really highlighted some of the things that were really happening in our community that were continuing to impact students academically, emotionally, and the reverberation on how this impacted teachers as well and their views on education and the profession. So as we look at our workforce efforts as a company and looking at how do we bring about change and impact the community positively, we had to make some pivots based on what we saw happening around us and realizing that we need to be part of the solution. And I think that's one of the challenges for companies, for school districts, for legislators to see their role and what changes need to occur so that we can bring around the positive impacts that's needed. If you look at how we responded as a company during the pandemic, I mean, changing one of our lubricant facilities to making hand sanitizer to respond to the needs during COVID, providing PPE gear for first responders, providing emergency funds for students in undergrad just to help them continue with their studies, and laptops for students in need, and just reimagining some of the ongoing things that we're already doing, like the Back to School Fest, and how do you give the kids what they need to be successful in a virtual environment, but continue to help the families as they prepare and navigate that transition. And as we all face the challenge of operating virtually, who were those partners who were already ahead of the curve in this space, reaching out to the superintendents in places like Miami, who was ahead of the curve in this space, partnering with NEED, National Education Development, to help facilitate professional development for teachers, particularly hands-on math and science. Trying to do that virtually is a challenge, and they came up with some great ideas to help us in this space. But also think of how do we close the gap and the number of teachers. We have an effort partnered with the Smithsonian Science Education Center, a diversity leadership program. And part of our challenge is to try to attract or retain 30,000 educators by the year 2030. And we do this each year by bringing together educators, business leaders, education advocates, bring together teams each year to develop solutions to go back to have process to attract, retain, and develop leaders in this space. And we understand this is a small part of it, but it is a part of the bigger puzzle, and understanding that we all have a role to play in this space, and that we all have to be comfortable thinking that what worked before is not going to move us forward based on the challenges and things that have been highlighted over the past couple of years. So great opportunity for us to move forward. Looking forward to partnering with Children at Risk in forums like this, and talking to other experts that you have on the panel about how we do this effectively moving forward. So thanks again for the opportunity for Shell to partner.
Absolutely, Frazier. And just looking at that photo of you before, you could, that was before the pandemic, and then you had the pandemic beard. It's just amazing. The pandemic's affected us all, but you're good looking either way, Frazier. So it
I
doesn't.
appreciate it. Pandemic has aged us all.
Thank you, Frazier Wilson from Shell. And we thank you very much for your remarks, Frazier. Let's go to our first speaker. We have Kim Parker, who's the Chief Program Officer at Children at Risk. And Kim, we did a special report that Kim's going to be sharing with you, focusing on pandemic learning loss. And so Kim's out in Austin, and we had a number of good sponsors for this report. People are very interested in getting the data on this. So Kim, give us an idea. I want you to say a few words, then I'm going to come back on and ask you a couple questions.
Sure, Dr. Bob. We're really excited to present this report. Overall, we wanted to review the impact the pandemic had on Texas students and schools, utilizing a whole child, whole community, whole school approach. But we also really wanted to look forward. We wanted to make sure that we were including recommendations for policymakers and school administrators, that we can really leverage the lessons we've learned during the pandemic and really focus our attention on how we can make improvements and better support our schools and our students. All right. You guys ready to get started, Dr. Bob?
Yeah, take it away.
All right, let's get going, guys. All right, so 10 minutes is not enough time to cover all of the information that we processed through during our review of our classrooms in crisis. But really what we want to acknowledge is that we found ourselves in exceptional circumstances the past couple of years. And it's important we acknowledge that the impact the pandemic had on our students, schools, and families, but also, like I said, really focus on those opportunities moving forward. Our Classrooms in Crisis report reviews those impact the pandemic had on our Texas schools and our Texas students. But again, we always make sure we're looking towards the future and include recommendations from policymakers and school administrators. But I think that what is probably comes to no surprise for everyone on this call is that what became very clear as we were reviewing the data was that schools not only serve as the center for a child's educational experience, but that it also is a community social safety net, providing essential services that wrap themselves around a child and a family, allowing them to be successful in school. So over the next few minutes, I'll be highlighting some of the challenges that faced by students and schools and the resulting outcomes post-pandemic. Our staff will be monitoring the chat, so please feel free to use it. And we are going to dive in because 10 minutes is never enough time. So as we looked at the wide range of issues impacting the educational experience of students and teachers, we felt that they fell into three big buckets. Obviously, COVID-19 and education, but also health and well-being and the poverty and the pandemic. We'll not have time to touch on every single one of these issues, but you guys can find that in our full report on our website. So as we continue to assess the impact the pandemic has had on our schools and our students, we have to first recognize that data is still limited. However, utilizing STAR test data, we can see the high level impact COVID had on students' testing results. Texas was one of those few states that administered standardized testing to students for the 2020-2021 school year. And as we all would expect, students see significant decrease in academic performance between the 2018-2019 year and the 2020-21 year, with vulnerable students being disproportionately impacted. However, students did demonstrate impressive resilience, and we saw reading levels bounce back to 2019 or higher in 2022. And math levels also increased, although not back to the pre-pandemic numbers, but we would expect that we'll continue to see improvements as we move forward. But as we all know, STAR test results are critically important to school funding, teacher compensation, and administrator priorities. So as students continue to recuperate from learning loss, we must ensure that schools and students are not penalized for testing results that are notably out of their control. The pandemic also exacerbated other challenges students and schools faced. Dr. Bob kind of mentioned this earlier, but we know that chronic absenteeism is a strong predictor for a variety of student outcomes and that impacts learning loss. A student who's chronically absent any year between 8th and 12th grade is 7 times more likely to drop out of school. And even before COVID, chronic absenteeism was an issue for Texas schools, with 12.5% of students missing a 10th of instruction during 2019. Since then, we've seen a 10% increase in chronic absenteeism. In 2020-21, nearly 760,000 students, or 15%, missed a tenth of their instruction, with 64% of campuses also having a decrease in overall enrollment from 2018-2019 to 2020-21. These numbers suggest that a high number of students are falling through the cracks. But Texas does not have a standard definition for chronic absenteeism. For us to really tackle this problem, we have to first define it. If we can officially define chronic absenteeism, we can ensure that we're allowing for appropriate data collection. And by standardizing the data collection, students' needs can be quickly identified, strategies can be developed, and students can be better supported. The quick pivot to virtual education yielded mixed results, as I'm sure all of us are aware, but it really highlighted the inequities between different student demographics. Significant disparities exist based on where you live in Texas, with Texas's rural population representing approximately 90% of all Texans without broadband access. And not unexpectedly, economically disadvantaged Texans, students had unequal access to technology. Schools did work very diligently to try to cross this digital divide. However, additional opportunities exist post-pandemic to improve this disparity and further refine technology support for students who are most impacted by it. As I mentioned earlier at the beginning, schools often serve as that social safety net for a variety of other services for students. Many students receive free or reduced breakfast and lunch, an essential service to reduce food insecurity and improve attendance, class participation, and grades. As schools pivoted to at-home learning, they were also required to come up with creative solutions for distributing meals during school shutdowns and for virtual students. Schools were able to meet this need by providing drive-by distribution centers or food drop-off programs, working really hard to mitigate any challenges the student might have at home, such as transportation issues or parent work schedules. But despite this really significant effort, from 2018 to 2021, we saw food insecurity nearly double, with significant impact to students. But an opportunity exists to expand the community eligibility provision for high poverty school districts and to address food insecurity, and use this experience with COVID as an opportunity to establish standard pivot plans should another emergency situation arise. In addition to access to nutrition services, the pandemic also delayed required childhood immunizations, resulting in significant gaps in protection for both students and for schools. Reasons for delaying immunizations during COVID included a general fear of COVID-19, abiding by social distancing practices, and missing scheduled well-child visits. But it's really important for all of us to note that even prior to COVID, immunization rates for childhood vaccines were already beginning to decline in Texas, and we were seeing exemptions increase. These delays in immunizations put students and staffs at additional risk of infectious disease, and combined with the lower than expected COVID-19 vaccination rates is a cause for concern. In 2020-21 school year, with the return to in-person learning, over 45 school districts had temporary shutdowns due to COVID-19 outbreaks among staff and students, and these shutdowns continued the disruption to education. We need to make additional effort to make improvement for our overall childhood vaccination rates to ensure that children are healthy and ready to learn, but also that the school environment is a healthy and stable environment for all that attend. Mental health is something that we all have been really talking about. And although COVID-19 is not the sole cause for the increase in mental health concerns among students, it certainly is a contributing factor to the overall mental health wellness of our student body population and impacted the timely identification of mental health needs. In fact, schools are the most likely place where mental health concerns will be detected. And this move to at-home learning made the detection and then also the subsequent support more difficult. In fact, during the last year, 73% of Texas youth with depression did not receive treatment. But again, COVID provides us with a unique opportunity to make a change for a better and put more resources into mental health services, including in establishing a required ratio for mental health providers in Texas to better support identification and treatment. As you can see here in the right-hand top corner, Texas currently doesn't meet any of the recommended ratios for mental health care providers, allowing students who are struggling with mental health to slip through the cracks and overburdening the staff that are currently trying to serve them. One of the factors contributing to the chronic absenteeism we mentioned, and of course, mental health among students, was housing instability. Between 2019 and 2020, Texas was one of the states with the biggest increase in homelessness, with an increase of 5.3%. Families with children made up 30% of the homeless population, and households with children were over twice as likely to report being behind on rent or mortgage payments as those that without. This housing instability has contributed to mental health and chronic absenteeism as housing situations had to shift. Ultimately, that impacts a student's educational success. As our federal and state housing provisions expire, evictions are beginning to increase, with March 2022 having filings 80% over the average, suggesting that housing instability is going to continue, resulting in significant challenges for our schools and the need to invest in solutions for these families and to ensure that students are not lost to housing changes. Although most of our report focuses on the K through 12, it would be highly remiss of us not to highlight the impact the pandemic also had on early childhood education. We all know the importance of early childhood education and the role that it plays on the ultimate success of a child. Between 2020 and 2021, Texas lost 21% of its childcare providers, turning 242 communities into childcare deserts. As of 2021, there is a significant gap in the number of childcare seats available and the number of seats that are needed, highlighting a significant crisis in access to childcare, impacting both the child's educational experience, but also that childcare coverage that's so necessary for parents who work. EC is essential for both the child and family, so significant focus needs to be placed on improving access to ECE in Texas and stabilizing the workforce. We do have this opportunity to invest in our early childcare programs and build a statewide articulation framework to support our educators. So although 10 minutes is nowhere long enough for these complicated issues, no matter how fast I speak, it does touch on the myriad of challenges that COVID-19 created for our students and for our educational system. But it also presents us with a number of opportunities as we head into legislative session. Today, you will hear from experts further diving into these challenges, but if you take one thing from this very quick review, it is with all the detriment that COVID-19 caused for our schools and students, it also provides us the opportunity to create a system that better supports our students, our families, and our teachers. Leveraging these lessons learned will ensure that when we face such a challenge again, we will meet it with wisdom and experience. Before I hand it back to Dr. Bob, I just want to quickly acknowledge that we could not have done this report and reviewed all of this data without the generous support from the William Stamps Farish Fund, our Memorial Hermann Community Benefit Corporation, and the John M. O'Quinn Foundation. I'm excited to share this report with you. It is posted up on our website for you all to read. We will be monitoring the chat, but for right now, Dr. Bob, back to you.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you just a couple of questions about the report because it's, it outlines a lot of things. I did a press conference before we did the summit, and then the opening remarks. It outlines a lot of those things, but for me, a couple of the important things are sort of the bright lights, right? I mean, after Hurricane Harvey, we were able to look at data all along the Gulf Coast and in Houston, and we expected huge learning loss because for 2 weeks, a lot of these kids didn't have school. And what we've noticed is that the kids bounced back more quickly than I thought they would be, frankly. And almost the same thing here, right? I mean, while we still see a lot of this learning loss, there are these little groups of kids where you saw teachers work extra hard and principals, and they should be sort of an idea for us. They should be an example for us of how we do not just post-pandemic education, but education, right? I mean, because they've been able to be super successful. And what we see across our state are there still districts, pandemic or not, have just not been successful.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's interesting. One, I think we need to recognize that children as a whole are highly resilient. It was a challenging couple of years, but education was still occurring in the home. Maybe not the same way, not the same format. Maybe the test numbers are not as great as we would like, but children were still learning, just maybe not at the pace we had hoped that they would. But they are rebounding, and teachers are working so hard to ensure that we're investing in our children and that they're trying to close that gap as quickly as possible. But I also think that we need to be generous with ourselves. We just went through a significant impact as a country, as a world, and these children also struggled with that. There may have been mental health challenges. Their families may have really struggled with housing insecurity, food insecurity. There may have had to be moves, et cetera. There's a lot of social stressors that occur, and we need to be generous with our teachers and with our students as we begin coming up to curve. They will catch up, and we can look at those pockets of success across the state to really figure out what are some of those creative solutions that will allow those students to succeed moving forward.
And the second point I wanted to make, and it's related to early education, but to everything that we're talking about, though, is that there's so many parents and so many people that just want to get back to normal. And we can't get back to normal when we're this far behind. And when it's early education, we're nowhere near getting back to just being near normal, because so many of our early education facilities are still not open, still far behind. And so there's still a lot of work for us to do. And we have to continue to remind our state legislators that there's work to be done. We want to help, but we're going to need some leadership here.
Yeah, we need leadership, and we need support and resources. We need to acknowledge the role that early childhood educators play in the ultimate success of a child. And we also need to invest in that profession. And I think that's the opportunity. One of the opportunities we have this legislative session is we need to invest in the profession. We are missing seats so that parents can't go to work because there's no childcare. But a lot of that is due to the fact that a lot of childcare facilities had no option but to close, especially our smaller ones during the pandemic. There wasn't a work for them. They had to move on to different employment opportunities, and they haven't all come back. But in that, we're also recognizing that our workforce is changing, and we need to value our workforce at a higher level, especially our early childhood providers, to ensure that we have the educational opportunities available for those kids.
Kim Parker, nice job. Thank you very much for sharing the report with us. And
all right, thank you, Dr. Bob.
I think there's in the chat box, someone put in, I think Amy put in, how do you get to the report? So people will be looking at that. Thank you so much. Let's go on to the next part of our summit today, creating a more equitable learning environment. And Kristen Wells Lewis is with us today out of Prairie View A&M, our good friends out there, and she has a rock star panel. Kristen, you got some good people on your panel to talk about this equitable learning environment. I'm excited to hear about this.
I am excited too. I'm also excited to be here with you all today and to continue to further the conversation around equitable learning environments as we press past the pandemic, or the panini, as people call it.
I've not heard the panini, but I like it. I like it a lot. So I'm going to turn it over to you. I'll pop up when time is up and we'll go from there. Thank you so much, Kristen.
You're welcome. Thank you, Bob. Again, I am Kristen Wells Lewis. I'm a cooperative extension agent here at Prairie View A&M University, and I'm housed out of Dallas County. And I have a stellar panel that is going to be here with us today, starting with Ms. Toni B. Shelton, who's the Chief Impact Officer of Communities and Schools of the Heart of Texas. She's a licensed master level social worker from Killeen, Texas, and received her master's degree in social work from Baylor University, Diana Garland School of Social Work in 2017. Since then, Toni has been a site coordinator and project manager of a grant-funded after-school program, and is the Chief Impact Officer for CIS in Waco, Texas. So let's welcome Ms. Toni Shelton.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning. And we also have Dr. Charla Horton-Williams, who is joining us, who's the Senior Director of Academic Recovery from the Commitment Partnership and the co-founder of Managing Partner School Leadership for Social Justice. Welcome, Dr. Horton-Williams.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Awesome. And we have Robin McDermott, Chief Executive Officer of Transformation Waco.
Good morning. Thank you for inviting me.
Good morning. And last but certainly not least, we have Jonathan Finston, State Director for Texas, the Education Trust.
Hey, everybody, present.
Present. Good morning, everyone. And just like Bob said, we have such a phenomenal panel, and I'm excited to be here with you all today and moderate this conversation. So we're just going to hop straight into it because we have so much to discuss and not as nearly as much time as we would need to carry this conversation. So I often like to just start with general conversation just so that our panelists can chime in and share their expertise around specific conversation. So when we talk about the many cracks in our education system that were unveiled and magnified during the pandemic, can you touch on pressing issues that currently face our classrooms? And anyone can hop in and answer that one. Don't be shy.
I'm happy to start. I can think of a few things that I think are pressing. I think first of all, Kristen, is a mindset shift that has to occur if we are going to come out of this pandemic better and stronger than we went into it. I think that number one, far too many people in the education ecosystem are eager for a return to normal, as Dr. Bob mentioned earlier. But back to normal is not good enough for our kids. So just this mindset shift that we've got to radically reimagine the way we see school, the way we see the role of educators, and the way we invest in school. So I think mindset shift is probably one of the most pressing. I'll also add, with the Great Resignation and the pressing teacher shortage, I think that that's an issue all by itself, but we've got record numbers of novice teachers entering classrooms. We've got record numbers of alternatively certified teachers entering the classrooms, and we don't have guaranteed, viable, high quality curriculum in every school. And so many people are entering our schools with the best of intentions and hearts of gold, ready to serve our students, but not sufficiently resourced to provide the most robust academic experience for kids. And so the lack of broadly available and accessible high quality curriculum is a problem. And I would say probably the third thing I would mention is that, just with 2 years of disrupted learning, just student readiness is a pressing problem. We've got exorbitant numbers of standards in Texas across every grade level. And the reality is kids' learning was disrupted, but we've expected students to walk back into schools ready to meet grade level instruction, where they're missing prerequisite skills because there just wasn't sufficient time in the classroom over the past couple of years. And so how do we then meet the need of student readiness? Well, tier 1 instruction and tier 2 intervention are two totally different things. And so it goes back to the teacher preparation discussion about are we fully investing in the professional development and training of teachers to ensure that they are sufficiently equipped to meet the needs that students are walking into classrooms with right now.
Absolutely. That was a phenomenal answer and kind of giving us the lay of the land of what the classroom currently looks like. So that leads me into our next question. You mentioned a lot about just not having the right tools and not having the right resources. And we know that a lot of that impact is severely impacting our low income schools. So when we talk about the pandemic and what learning looked like there, one of the biggest things that we noticed was how behind we were digitally. So when we think about that space we were in, I would love for another panelist to expand on the lack of access to resources necessary to move to digital platforms and how this has increasingly set our schools back.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in, but I know we have some other experts to talk about this. I want to echo what Charlotte said. I think we're at this moment where a lot of the cracks that were revealed or magnified, these are things in the education equity space we've been talking about for a very, very long time. And now, because there is a wider impact, or the perception of a wider, broader impact on certain communities and families and schools that maybe haven't felt that in the past, we're talking about these things. And so the mindset choice is really, are we willing to look those things squarely in the face and address a lot of those challenges for all kids in all schools, and not accept, oh, a return to normal for those who, you know, are probably going to return to normal more quickly and probably were set up to be more successful anyways. So all the things that Charla mentioned. On, you know, on digital access in particular, it's the same story, right? We sometimes call it the homework divide or the digital divide, but that lack of connectivity was certainly an issue before the pandemic, and it became an urgent priority really quickly. And school district leaders and school leaders did the best they could to pivot very quickly. There were resources available to do it, but you're talking about standing up an infrastructure really quickly that never existed before. And I think the thing that we like to also talk about is, it's one thing to put, you know, a machine and an internet router in a house. It is another thing entirely to catch up on the digital literacy divide that also exists in that household. So if a parent, especially the parent of a young child, doesn't have the experience or the background interacting with technology, there's going to be a gap there as well. And so I think the family engagement part of that also got highlighted and brought to the forefront, because it's not just a technology fix. And of course, you know, there's all kinds of inequities when you actually talk about, well, what is the bandwidth in that household? How many families and individuals are now relying upon, you know, that limited bandwidth? And so, yeah, I think there were obviously a lot of technical challenges, but also the things that maybe we don't pay enough attention to in terms of, you know, the skill and the knowledge and confidence you need to engage with those platforms.
Absolutely. And that brings us right to our next point. So when we talk about how we're connecting not only just like access to different things, but the education around the different things that we're providing and what that looks like in a home environment versus a in-school environment. Dr. Shelton, as a former social worker, can you provide insight on how the shift to at-home learning affected children outside of academic learning loss?
Good morning, everyone. I first want to start by saying, although one day, I like that you put that on there. I'm all about manifestation. I have not achieved the doctor status yet, sis. But yeah, let's put that out there and let's continue.
We will put it out there. It is yours to receive.
Yeah. So when we're thinking about shifting to at-home learning, I think we have to understand that that kids are kids, you know, and to always keep that first. But being a social worker, understanding that it's not just about academic, it's about providing that social, emotional learning activities. And so one of the things when I was in the after school setting that we really tried to enforce was creating opportunities that were innovative, that weren't necessarily tied to just academics. And so Dr. McDermott could probably speak a little bit more to that, since she kind of got the 500-foot level of that experience. But we recruited key stakeholders in the community. So when we're looking at gardening, we had someone that was an experienced gardener, and we were able, with the permission of the district, to provide in-person opportunities for our students. So we did gardening. We partnered with someone that's a community member that does Zoom, but professionally, and offered those opportunities, right? And so it's all about trying to be creative and engaging students outside of the academic sphere, because we understand that if I'm not motivated, if I'm not inspired, I'm not going to focus on reading, writing, and arithmetic. And so what we tried to do is provide more of those wraparound services. So the movement, right? The gardening, right? Different opportunities for play. So yeah, that's my thoughts on that.
Absolutely. I think that's good. It's the extension way. So typically what we do is provide those hands-on learning experiences. And I think that specifically in the pandemic, it taught us how to lean on our community partners. And I know for a lot of our schools, just for the safety of our kids, we have a lot of restrictions, but what does it look like to kind of create like a full framework where everyone has a part to play? And so I want to ask Ms. McDermott, can you elaborate on Transformation Waco and how bringing in outside partners and community members shows strong development inside of the classroom?
You bet. So Transformation Waco is an in-district charter partnership with Waco ISD. We were state mandated organization because our 5 campuses were traditionally chronically low performing and the bottom 5% in the state. And so the district was facing closing our 5 schools or handing it over to a different operating partner. And that's what we do. And we were created as within the community school model. So our purpose, even prior to the pandemic, was to first look at the barriers to academic success and addressing those in addition to accelerating learning with our students. So we were very aggressive with chronic absenteeism, even prior to the pandemic. We have had social workers in our schools. We've added 3-year-olds to our full day pre-K just to give more access to our kids a little bit earlier. And we run an early a school readiness program for 0 to 3 parents. And that's a parent-child initiative where it's a combination of having instructors in the home helping with school readiness and also cohorts coming together to learn together. We know that kids, if their basic needs aren't met, if they can't have their medical needs met, if they can't see, then they're not going to be successful in school. And we realized up front that one of our statistics, 3% of the children who attended our schools who had a screening and were required to have a vision evaluation were actually going to an optometrist and seeing the doctor, 3%. So we, in our first years, we started a vision clinic. We hired an optometrist. We have a system for taking our kids to see them. And we've gone from 3% to 80% of our students who need glasses actually getting those services. And, we do have around 170 partnerships within the community that work in our schools. Some of the key things that we've discovered is that your community wants your schools to be successful. We always have to have one of the outcomes in mind when we bring a community partner in. Are they increasing attendance? Are they helping with academics? And we have very aggressive training for our partners, and we have very targeted ways of using them to make sure that it's a successful experience for both the student and the partner. I could talk all day, but those are the key, our key pieces.
I think it's a phenomenal model. I feel like that we had something like this when I was in elementary school, but I don't know that it had a name. It talked a lot about how a lot of the issues that we see in classrooms that are slowing our students down are related to unmet needs like glasses or lunch and dinner. And so we see a lot of different program partners coming in and providing that framework, but it's awesome to see that there's a specific call to action to Transformation Waco to say, hey, here's the needs of our community and we want you to be able to solve them. And we think that you can solve them. And here's how. So that you guys are doing awesome work. So that is awesome to hear.
Thank you.
So I want to go to Finston. In your time as an educator, you worked with special needs populations. So very similar to some of the different things that we just discussed, but special needs populations, where do you see inequity specifically in this population? And do you see a need for stronger resources as we continue to build from pandemic learning loss?
Well, this was a long time ago, my time as a classroom educator. And I'll tell you, going back to one of the things that Charla mentioned at the top, number one, certified special education educators are always a shortage area. And so just having skilled, qualified educators who understand how to differentiate instruction, how to specifically meet the needs of a variety of different students is such a critical skill. And so I would say that it starts there. Now, when you think about, the compounding impact of the pandemic, we also have a system in Texas that's no secret that has not historically resourced and met the needs of our special education population. So that's always been an ongoing issue. I think it is something the legislature, I know, is continuing to work on, and did some things in their last session to try to make more resources available, even to families and directly to students of special needs students. But I think, going back to kind of the move to, what it was like to be virtual, and, I think there are so many needs that you can't meet when you have a screen between you, that the relational aspect, the nonverbal communication things, a lot of the things that we might take for granted are especially important with this population. I think we also, just the idea of early screening, I think Robin was talking about, certain kinds of screenings, but the ability to get in there early and to diagnose and understand what a student might have a delay or might, that gets disrupted pretty significantly. And that amount of time is a compounding factor when students come back into our schools and we're trying to understand, well, where is this student at, and how am I going to differentiate and meet their needs? So I think those are just a few examples. And again, I'm not in the field. I am not currently, I wouldn't consider myself an expert in this specific area, but those are some of the things that certainly come to mind, and I'm sure others can weigh in too.
Thank you so much for sharing it. I always like to encourage educators by saying, once an educator, always an educator. And one thing that I feel like that we definitely learned in the pandemic is that in a lot of the spaces, we don't necessarily have to rewrite the wheel. Like, there were a lot of things that really, really worked, that those individual learning, those individual touch points, but we just found ways to mesh them with like new resources, both in and outside of the classroom. So I don't want you to think that your experience isn't valid because it was some time ago, because I'm quite sure that if you sat down and thought through some things that really, really worked, like you just shared with us, we could really think about how we can apply them today, and they would definitely make an impact. So a lot of times we see distance between our students, either because we have a lack of educators, so our classroom sizes are larger, so we don't get those one-on-one experiences. I think another one of our panelists earlier spoke to that parent engagement piece. So trying to incorporate more one-on-one touch points with parents through our different like goals nights or different activities where we can get in the face of the parents to say like, hey, here's how we both can support the students. So that's one thing that I always like to share when I go inside of the classrooms, is that I know that the time right now is different and it's unprecedented, but we all have a special calling to this space. And just trying to figure out how to definitely show up in that space. And so when we talk about special callings, Dr. Williams, throughout your work, you've engaged in a variety of learning environments through private, charter, and traditional public school. What is a commonality you have seen weave throughout education generally, and what have been the best strategy schools have taken to combat?
Yeah, I'll say a common challenge that I've seen in every single context. It speaks a little bit to what I talked about earlier, which is just preparation. I think that we got this chronic problem of assigning old solutions and old strategies to new problems and new contexts. And broadly, teacher preparation and leader preparation has not changed in decades. When you look at the way we trained teachers and leaders 50 years ago, that's pretty much still, with the exception of, now there's distance learning. But when we think about the competencies and the way we prepare teachers and leaders, things have not changed dramatically over the past many years. So I think that, and I hesitate to say this because I know there are proof points out there, Kristen. I know that people are doing it well, Do we see that enough? maybe not. But if I were to assign strategies, if I were to say, here's strategies that I think we need to employ to meet these preparation gaps, is number one, I think we have to be explicit about the inequity that, that exists now and that has existed chronically, in education. Like Jonathan said, yeah, the pandemic exacerbated it and brought it to light because it has had such a broader impact. But I think we've got to be explicit with the problem, that right now there's a mismatch, there's a gap between what students need and what educators are prepared to offer. I think we also have to be really honest with our gaps. I think that we all want to believe that we're doing the right thing for students. And I think our hearts tell us that we are. And I think but there's lots of evidence-based practices, lots of research that's not being utilized in practice. And we've got to be really clear about, are we teaching reading the right way? Are we teaching math the right way? Are we teaching what are we doing? Where are the gaps in our practice? And I think we got to be clear about our goals. I think we've got to be name the goal of closing opportunity gaps, closing performance gaps, increasing teacher and leader proficiency. We've got to say that these are issues, and then we've got to align strategies that actually meet those goals. And I've seen, in other parts of the country where, there are very, very explicit racial equity goals, gender equity, whatever those are. And then districts and schools are careful to assign appropriate resources to make those goals not just something that's on paper, but that can be actualized. A lot like what we just heard Ms. McDormand talk about in Transformation Waco. Here's where it is, here's what we want it to be, and here's what we're going to do to make it happen. And when that alignment is present, then we can see some shifts in outcomes for students.
I agree. I think that you all have shared so much good stuff, and I'm trying to take notes so that I can try to do a good recap of all of the great things that you all have shared, because we're reaching that mark. But I want to close out, and I want to close out with a question and kind of get some context from each panelist on this question. Just to discuss moving forward, what do we see and how do we see this as we work together moving forward? So when we talk about those coordinated programs, and have you seen children benefit from after-school programs, and how can we encourage schools to have more of that? Because I think of after-school programming as an additional resource, and also a non-traditional school resource. So the way that our after-school programs are taught and trained, that additional investment that we want to see our teachers have, we know that a lot of times these different organizations have the flexibility to be able to get those things. So when we bring them into our school settings, what is the impact? Do we think that they're beneficial? Do we think we need more time with them? Do we think that in the future there could probably be some type of collaborative model where these organizations can employ a teacher for a specific subject or a specific classroom space on a topic that they're more invested and seasoned in?
I'll start off if everyone's okay with that. And so I can just kind of speak back to my personal experience with the 21st Century Grant. That was the grant that I was the site coordinator and briefly the project manager for. And I think what made it so effective is all of the targets, right? So we targeted food, we targeted academics, family, and social support. When you're looking at the food, we got a partnership with the district to where they provided a hot meal after school, and there was money budgeted that was allocated to give students a snack, right? And then when we're looking at the academia, we had to build in at least 1 hour of tutoring time. And so we got teachers and some paraprofessionals that were paid for their time to work outside of school, whether it was specifically for tutoring or homework help. when you're looking at supporting the family, right? Because oftentimes we look at specifically the student, but we've got to look at, and this is the social worker need, the environment around the student, right? And the number one supporter, the number one fan is going to be that parent. We had someone whose sole role was to do family parent engagement activities, right? This person was required to have at minimum one family meeting that was geared towards encouraging, inspiring, and connecting the parent in their students' life, but also providing them with opportunities to advance, whether that's professionally or personally. And then we're looking at the social support, and that's something that I had mentioned earlier. You're doing an assessment of your local community. Who are those key stakeholders? You know, who are those people that can provide funding for Zumba, right? Or who will volunteer their time. You're looking at your chambers of commerce. You're looking at your Transformation Waco or your district. You're looking at your NAACP. You're looking at your Divine Nine organizations, right? You're looking at Baylor, who's an adjunct professor that can write into their curriculum. One of the requirements is their students have to volunteer X amount of times and they can come and work and do a STEM-based activity, right? And so I think overall, it's putting our money where our mouth is, right? Because when you're asking people to go above and beyond outside of school time to support, you have to incentivize and reward them for that. So I'll again reiterate: food, academia, family support, and social support. And that's what I have to say. Thank y'all.
Thank you so much. So Ms. Shelton actually gave us a handful of different ways that we can integrate all of the different community partners in their specific area of expertise and what that looks like in the classroom. And since we are tight on time, I am going to end us here. But first, I want to say thank you to each panelist for all of the insight that you provided to the guests at the conference today. There's a lot of comments in the chat. People want to know who you are and how they can connect with you. So they have your bios, and I anticipate that you will probably have different people reaching out to see how they can learn different information from you. And again, I want to say thank you to everyone for participating in this session, and we hope that you all had a wonderful time.
Kristen, thank you very much. I have a question for one of your panelists, though, Kristen. I wanted to ask Charla. Charla was on a press conference with me earlier this morning as we talked about education reform. And Dr. Horton-Williams, all the organizations represented here are all disruptors, right? And when we've seen good things happen in Texas, it's because there's been pressure from us, pressure from parents to make things happen, right? And Jonathan's group is working hard on this. Of course, Robbins is. And do we think, and the other thing we know is that this disruption only works when you get leaders, superintendents who want to do this stuff and that are activists themselves. Do we think change is going to happen after the pandemic? Is this another layer of pressure? Or do we think that our state legislature will go back to, and school boards will go back to business as usual?
I don't think that students and parents are going to let us go back to business as usual. I think that there's going to be such a pressure chamber, if you will, from the broader community that says, hey, what we've always done is not enough for our kids. They deserve better, and get your rear in gear and give our students what they need. I do think that it requires, though, bold and visionary leadership. And I think that when everyone across sectors recognizes the role that they can play and really activates their own agency around change. It's hard to be the only person pressing for change. It's hard to be one of only two pressing for change. But when you've got an entire ecosystem, cross sector saying, this is not okay, we've got to do things radically different, which is why I encourage everyone, really don't just call for change, don't just hope for it, but actually activate change in your context so that it's not as scary for the next leader to be bold and visionary when it comes to affecting change in your schools.
Yeah, and I know everyone would have an answer to this, but there are districts across our state, no matter what the wealth level is, that are underperforming, right? And we just need to make sure that we get our state legislature on the right track. Thank you guys for all that you do. Kristen, really nice job. Thank you all very much. So
thank you all.
And I'll use this opportunity. I think in the chat box, we're going to also put a survey. We want people to continue to let us know how the conference is going, do our survey in terms of evaluation. So we're looking forward to that. Let's go to our next superstar panel. Another good one focusing on supporting teachers today and tomorrow. And my good buddy, Sharon Jones, who's the Chief Equity Officer at Children at Risk. That's a nice background, Sharon. I need to get me one of those. That's really nice. But I know you have a great panel. So take it away, Sharon. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm happy to share this background with you. And I'm equally happy to bring together a really fine group of presenters to talk about supporting teachers today and tomorrow. I'm happy to introduce, joining me today is Harrison Peters. He's the CEO of Men in Color and Educational Leadership. Welcome. Erica Milson, who's a literary performance coach with the Houston A+ Challenge. Really excited to have her here today as well. Rochelle Darville, middle school science and history teacher, West St. John High School. And Eduardo A. Rodriguez, the executive director of the Council on Regional Economic Expansion and Educational Development, also known as CREED. So welcome to you all today. As a former teacher, I can relate to having taught through a couple of really serious times in our nation's history and locally. I was in a first grade classroom during 9/11. I also was teaching special needs students at a time when we were receiving students in Texas from Louisiana during Hurricane Katrina. But I'm really in awe of the resilience and the bounce back of teachers, students, and families during this pandemic. This has been 2 years of a really trying time for all of us. We've endured losses, both personally and professionally. And so I want to talk about, what teachers need to be successful and to help students and families be successful in what we're calling a post-pandemic, but we're still going through it, to be completely honest. And so I want to ask some questions to each of you specifically, and then get into some general discussions. I'd like to start with Mr. Peters, and with your educational background in Florida, can you talk a little bit about how your state's restrictions on schools might impact student and social academic development in the wake of this pandemic?
Absolutely. And hello, everyone. Sharon, am I coming through? I'm traveling. I'm in a
Yes, you
hotel, so
are.
hopefully you can hear me.
I
Good,
can.
good. Super excited to be here, and just want to ditto everything everyone said this morning. Teachers and leaders, they get the Purple Heart of service. They have been on the battlefield in the front lines, really doing the work that's necessary for our children. Florida's an interesting place. And I think about James Baldwin. James Baldwin said, "You can't fix it if you can't see it." And typically when people think of Florida, they think of Disney World and the beaches and a destination place for vacation. But people don't realize that Florida has a naked underbelly. In the 30s, 40s, and 50s, we were characterized as the most violent state in the South for lynchings. And it's interesting because, like James Baldwin said, people don't want to see that. They actually want to whitewash that, and they don't want to talk about it. But that's important to our history in our schools. So when you ask about the harm that it does permanent harm, because there's an entire cross-section of history that students may or may not learn about. And when you don't know about where you come from, or you don't know about the things that have made you special and made you stronger, then you sort of forget who you are. And then whose decision is it to learn whose history? So that there's been a back and forth in the state of Florida around what we should learn, what teachers can teach. And I can't imagine, I was a 4th and 5th grade teacher, a superintendent, a high school principal, and a middle school principal. I can't imagine now the fear, and I hear this from teachers around, I can't afford to teach the wrong thing, or to make the wrong comment, or to develop the wrong lesson plan. And I've got a son who's still in school, and we have these conversations about, like, are you learning what you believe is your history and your heritage and things like that? So there's an interesting interplay in the state of Florida where you have a strong push to tell history in a certain vein, but there's also a strong fight with a lot of advocacy groups that it can't just be one history. It can't just be one perspective. We can't just be the state of Disney World and beaches. There's a naked underbelly that we have to face. And then that pain point actually makes us stronger. So we live by this creed that with this level of being uncomfortable comes growth.
And there's so many lessons that Texas and Florida can learn from each other. You know, we share sort of that underbelly of a history that we tiptoe around. And so I think it's important for us to name it and to claim it and to you know, ask teachers to speak up and be bold about you know, what it is, what the restrictions do to them in the classroom, and how painful it is also for students to not be given the full truth of what our history is. So thank you for sharing that. I also want to ask you, Harrison, what you believe should be prioritized in conversations around education in 22 as we are enduring this ongoing saga of a pandemic. And what do you see are the largest challenges and opportunities for growth?
Yeah, so when we think about just the largest opportunities and the challenges, we know we're coming out hopefully of a pandemic. But I like to go back and say, I think the most important thing is we concentrate on who and what matters most, and that's educating our children. And for some reason, we've gotten away from that, and adult interests have crept into sort of this bureaucracy of education. So I believe, we have to fundamentally recenter on what our students need. And when I say our students, I mean all of our students. When we look across the country, our ecosystem of learners is becoming increasingly diverse. Yet our teaching core and our leading core isn't diverse. The work that we do, you think about the country, we've got nearly 80% of principals that are white. 80% of school board members are white. Nearly 90% of superintendents are white. And these are the folks that are driving policy for an ecosystem of students that are students of color. So it's important that representation matters. So when we think about the challenge and the opportunity, I really think we have to double down on great teaching. That is the thing that matters most. Teachers make the difference. There's also increasing literature and research that's saying the building principle has an even greater impact on learning than we thought before. So for me, my theory of action is great teaching and great leading. Coupled with that, we've got to ensure that our educated workforce is diverse, because there's also tons of research out there that talks about the value proposition and the return on investment when you have teachers and leaders of color. Not only do students of color excel, but white students excel. So we have to ensure that we are increasing our educator workforce. And then the final thing that I'll say is we've got to look at federal, state, and local policy, because that drives behavior. Someone said earlier, like, are we going to go back to what we were? Are we going to sort of retract back to the day of pre-COVID? And my optimism says no. But what you look at is we're still being monitored and evaluated by the same archaic ways. So if you want us to behave different, then reward us for being innovative versus punishing people. So I think there has to be a paradigm shift where we're letting the forced innovation of COVID help us behave, think, and act differently.
Thank you so much. I want to ask Ms. Darville, as teaching practices continue to develop, and we're seeing an influx of things that are overwhelming our teachers, from having to switch the way that they are teaching, either be it virtual or in person or some combination due to COVID. How are you encouraging teachers to, as Dr. Fraser Wilson of Shell said earlier, embrace this disruption? And how are you encouraging teachers to keep their heads up at a time when they're asked to be more innovative than they've ever had to be before?
Well, first of all, I think teachers have to step out and step out on faith, step out on the knowledge that they have. Building relationships is going to be key for all teachers. Having that partner teacher, having that mentor that you can reach out and talk to about the issues, because it's not easy. As you know, we see in the news daily about the teacher shortage or teacher burnout. It's imperative that teachers get there and build these relationships with other teachers, other organizations to help them through to navigate this unprecedented time that we're seeing because of the pandemic, and also still dealing with the gaps in learning prior to the pandemic that has been mostly exacerbated more so with the pandemic. It is stressful. And, you know, I would advise them to join organizations that build their pedagogical skills so they can meet the needs of all the different types of students that we have in our classrooms. Being in a school environment that is supportive to thinking outside of the box to get things that we need to be more effective in doing our job. Go to organization conferences to get more knowledge about what other people are doing around the world, to educate students and putting the students at the center of the practice of what we do, not being bogged down with a whole bunch of data that tells us we know what the data is saying. We know what the problems are. We just need to find better tools to service our kids so they can be more proficient and excelling in the things that they're interested in and what need to know to survive.
Yeah, and what would you say to people who are considering a career in education at this point? I mean, sometimes in our audience, we have students and we have students of education and professors of education. And what would be your advice to someone who's studying the craft of teaching right now and looking towards a career in education? What do they need to bring with them to this job?
I think they need to bring a open heart because, you know, we always hear the adage that teaching is a work of the heart. It really is, because you see students in all various stages. I mean, you see them from the beginning all the way to the end. You see that growth process. Sometimes it's not that easy. Know that every child that you come in contact with may not receive what you're saying when you originally tell them, but give them time. I always say teaching is like raising a butterfly. You know, it's almost like you're in a cocoon stage, and it's a process. Have an open mind. You know, receive feedback. Teaching is not that, you know, easy craft that most people seem to think that, oh, you're just a teacher. No, it's work. We're not just teachers. We are, you know, educators. We're social workers. We're everything that a child actually needs in that particular room, in that particular space. So go in with the idea that, you know, have your toolbox filled with as many skills to diversify for the different types of learners, but also go back in and know that sometimes the things that you learn in the classroom may not necessarily, I mean, in your studies may not actually work in your classroom, that you have to be innovative to come up with new skills and new ideas to reach today's students. So I would actually, my biggest thing is having an open mind, getting a mentor. These are all the important things that you actually need going into the classroom for today.
Thank you so much. I want to talk now about some of the specific needs at the Texas border. And so, Mr. Rodriguez, if you tell us a little bit about how CREED is working to provide teachers and students in that area a high quality learning experience, and tell us, you know, what are some of the specific needs?
Well, thank you. And yes, what we've been really focused on in utilizing our philanthropy and our particular engagement is unlike some of the other panelists. We're not involved directly within the school system, but we're engaged in trying to move the school system to better meet our needs. And the way we define that is focused on the economic output, the economic opportunity that the preparation at K through 12 produces, that lays the foundation for not only individual success, but societal success and the components that come into that. And already the topic that's been fairly clear is the fact that it's very difficult to achieve that if you don't have quality teaching and you don't have quality teachers. And so when we started our effort, we really put our emphasis initially on a program intended to expand the number of dual credit certified teachers in our public schools. Why? Because the data is fairly clear that students that take anywhere from 9 to 12 dual credit hours in high school have doubled their opportunity as well as their chances of completing post-secondary education. And as I think everybody here can agree, the needs for higher level academic attainment is really fundamental to the success that we're talking about regarding both individual expansion as well as economic expansion on a societal basis. So that was our first effort in that regard. We put the emphasis on, we want to expand quality seats, quality schools, because the opportunity to gain access to quality education really rests with the quality of the person who's instructing in the classroom, namely the teacher. The other two pieces that we've developed over the last 2 to 3 years is in partnership with the University of Texas at El Paso and specifically the College of Education. Significant number of our educators come out of the College of Education. So the focus point became, what can we do to basically prepare these students coming out as graduates for teaching to get into the classroom and to be effectively, classroom ready from day one. Now we know that they've got the 4 to 6 week student teaching component associated with most seniors that are engaged in getting their degree in education. But what we wanted to do in this instance, with the help of some additional funding, is we created a structure for what we call the Teacher in Residency program, allowing these individuals, instead of a 4 to 6 week student teaching process, actually achieve that over an entire academic year, working with specifically designated teachers from within that school district to better engage them so that by the time they finish that year, they are in a position, once they're hired, to walk into that classroom and be much more effective than they would be with just a 4 to 6 week process. We've seen some significant inroads in that regard, even to the point where now that school districts are stepping up and saying, hey, we want to sign up to this. We want to effectively, bring these students into our districts, and we want to support them, because the point of that entire year is that we need to have stipends to support them through that 12-month or that 9-month period, because they're not going to be working. They're there engaged to get their preparation and to effectively then be in a position so that they can step into the classroom the following year and really have the impact that we want them to have. So it's that aspect of how do we enhance the qualities through this particular process. And then the third thing that we've done is for teachers that have been in the system between 3 to 4 to 5 years, where the data shows that about 50% of teachers at that career point will invariably decide to leave the profession. And if we're at that point that we want to be able to maintain that quality, then the aspect here is kind of an extension of the residency program, only connected to those that are already in the classroom, being exposed to teacher coaches and mentors from the district that can talk through what's it like now going into year 3, going into year 5, what can you anticipate in the changes and the anticipation of being able to reform and enhance your craft as a teacher in the classroom, so that you want to stay with it and you want to maintain the quality that effectively you've been able to accomplish up to that point in time. So those are examples of 3 specific applications we've used our philanthropy for to bring change in the approach, as many people have already spoken about, which is, it's kind of crazy to think that we are looking for a change in direction, and yet we continue doing the same things we've been doing for 120 years plus that we've had a public system of education in our society.
Thank you so much. And so the impact of coaching and mentoring during times like this can't be overstated. And so I know Erica Milson has a lot to say about the impact of coaching and mentoring. And I want to ask you specifically about an understanding of the current literacy rates in Texas classrooms, and pandemic learning losses are compounding that, and specifically in schools where there's a high concentration of Black and Brown students. How do you guide teachers and families who want to shift classroom techniques in order to improve student literacy rates at a time like this, and they don't know where to start?
So good morning. I think the best place to start is just engaging those kids into reading by reading books together and talking about books. A lot of times, most of the kids who are performing at a lower reading level or a lower level is because they can't read the text at their grade level. And so just reading with them out loud and having conversations with them will help increase engagement, which will in turn allow for them to increase their reading levels to be able to handle text at their actual grade level. Also talking about books, these same kids who are reading below grade level fear talking to one another, fear talking to their teachers, fear talking to parents about their books just because of confidence. They're not sure. They're struggling with the content in general. So just having like very basic conversations. Tell me a little bit about what you're reading. Let's talk about the characters. That will help build confidence just at their level. Speaking from middle school background, I think a lot of times we think that instruction is supposed to look differently because kids are older, but a lot of those practices at the elementary level are just good practices, like where the teacher will call the kids to the rug and they would have a read aloud together, just time to engage in text together authentically. Those practices should be kept in middle school and high school as well as home, like at nighttime when parents read to their kids. I know it's like far-fetched when you're thinking about timing, but those things really do matter when you're trying to grow readers. So just authentic time to get kids engaged in text that they're interested in. Just starting there and then having very, very just like basic conversations about the text that they're reading.
Thanks. I want to shift to talk about what teachers personally need in this moment too. And so anyone can chime in here, but I think it's important for us to talk about self-care, because as teachers are being social workers and caregivers and educators in the classroom, some of the things that their students are facing, they themselves are facing. We've all been in this pandemic together. So if anyone can speak to, how can teachers feel supported at this time? And what are some innovative things that maybe you've seen in your own communities that we can all learn from? So I would love to hear from anyone who can speak to that.
I can speak a little bit
I'll
about.
say a couple of things. Go ahead.
Okay.
I know in our community, there's been a push for us to get together to decompress, I guess. Sit down and have time to talk about the things that are bothering us, being a support for each other within our own staff, having bonding time where we're releasing some of the frustration that we're feeling in the classroom or in the school, and just being able to share, and knowing that you're not alone in how you feel about things that are occurring. And it makes a big difference. It makes a big difference.
And I think Harrison was chiming in with something as well.
Yeah, I super excited because we're starting to look at teacher data differently. And I'll step back, and teachers just want to be heard and they want people to listen. So I think, we have to do a better job of that as leaders. But we're starting to see data and studies come out around what teachers really, really want. And when I talk about the data, we're starting to just aggregate the data in different ways that we haven't in the past. For instance, we know that we're in this mass exodus of teachers, and districts across the country are struggling with staffing their schools with qualified and quality teachers. We talked about Florida earlier, where the governor has signed an executive order. If you are a military veteran with so many years of service, you can get a emergency certification to teach, and your spouse also. So we're trying all types of things to get teachers in the classroom. But the interesting thing that I wanted to measure is we're starting to listen to teachers by race and what's important to them. And there's a recent study where white teachers responded. We believe that our profession and we're just not valued, and we're not being paid a living wage. And I'll be the first person to say, write the check, $1 million a year minimum. I just know that they do yeoman's work. But it was interesting, while teachers of color value pay, the highest thing on their priority list was effective leadership and professional development. So when we start to talk about listening to teachers, I think we have to ask the question, who specifically are we listening to? Because various community of educators have very different needs. And I was super excited to hear about creating those affinity spaces so teachers of color can heal, educators of color can heal and have their own spaces, because it's important that they have that opportunity and those moments for healing. So I would just double click on continuing to listen to teachers, to continue to give them ways and opportunities to be autonomous, because they know their students better than we would ever know them, and then to listen to them in their various educator groups, because I think that's when you get to the core of teacher needs, who have the student needs at the center of what they do.
And I would like to add something as well. Grace, that's like my big word when I work with teachers at different campuses. There are so many initiatives being thrown down from the district, campus level, And you have like first and second year teachers who are really trying to implement everything that's being expected of them. And they're just trying to also manage their classrooms as well as learn their content. And so I just have to tell them, like, give yourself some grace, breathe. We're going to take one thing at a time and really, really hit that hard. Like, what's the biggest bang for our buck to grow our kids? And so that's going to be our focus. So I think the biggest thing is just teachers and administrators understanding grace at this time. It's really, really important for both teachers and students.
Yeah, I think that's so important, you know, for all of us, is to understand that while, you know, students are going through what they're going through, so are the teachers. You know, teachers are experiencing loss just like their students are. And it's really important to stay focused on the fact that we're all in this together. Mr. Rodriguez, what do you think school districts can do right now to recruit and retain teachers?
Well, I think that, again, it gets down to a lot of the things that everybody on the panel has spoken to, which is that as long as there's an understanding that preparation for teachers, teacher skill set are all factors that come into play. That's what exists in the classroom from day in to day out. I mean, from looking at it, because I'm not a teacher, but looking at it from a business person's perspective and how you run things inside of any kind of business activity, you know that there are people in your organization that are charged with taking care of different factors to be able to accomplish what you need to accomplish. And we don't view the education process any different. We're talking about expertise in the classroom. It's part of the reason why we put the kind of programming that I mentioned earlier in the conversation that says, you know, we want to put the emphasis on developing quality within the teachers that are there. And that means listening to them and taking their discussions about what's going on inside the classroom to heart and being able to make that assessment. One of the challenges I think that exists in our system of governance because of the nature of the way we're structured is that at the board level, it's not always clear that they've got a full picture of exactly what's going on inside the classroom and the challenges that go from moving children from the first part of the pipeline to the middle part of the pipeline to the end of the pipeline, and the need to keep that attention there because the element of attainment is really rests with the quality of the teaching and the preparation that the teacher goes through in connection with getting the students ready. There's not going to be any way of substituting that in terms of the ultimate outcome. And I think it's important for those that are in position of oversight and administration to keep that in mind. Not so much the professional educators, but those that are elected leadership that are there to assist the professional leadership in executing the responsibility of educating our students.
Well, in this last couple of minutes, I want to give each of you the opportunity to tell me something really good. Give me an example of a teacher or a family or a school district or an administrator that is doing something really innovative. Earlier, we heard from Fraser Wilson of Shell, and he said that disruption brings innovation. So tell me what you are seeing that is inspiring you right now. I want to start with Erica.
It's so early in the year, I would say like the thing that I'm so excited to see, or teachers are excited to work with kids and to grow their students. So that like motivates me every day as well to show up to campuses and support them. I have two teachers at two different campuses. This is both their second year and they're both so eager to grow their kids. Like that's their focus. They're not like allowing for any distractions to like get them off track at all. They're just so eager. And I would say like that's a breath of fresh air, given the past couple of years that we just experienced, to see positive educators who are still like hungry to grow students. So that would be what I'm happy to see right now.
That's great. Rochelle?
One of the things that I'm really excited about in my district is our district has gone full-fledged with involving the community in the process of making policies, listening to the community, sending feedback to the community, getting their input on what happens in the school. And as the previous session talked about, it's a holistic approach. So it's not just school districts dealing with this crisis in isolation, but taking in consideration the whole community and how this pandemic has affected everyone. So I am really excited about the conversations that are happening in our community involving parents and regular citizens about what happens in our schools. So that's my excitement.
Great, great. Harrison?
Yeah, I'd like to just highlight 3 of my superintendent friends that are, I think, just doing great work. You've got Scott Murray in Ector County in Texas, who has really created some innovative ways to bring broadband internet to communities and students who is in a pretty rural area. And just the things that he's doing with technology and satellites is pretty groundbreaking, and it's making a difference. When I look at my friend superintendent in Houston ISD, he has centered student voice as part of this conversation. So his commitment is we're going to recenter children in the middle of everything that we do, and we're actually going to listen to them. And then LaTanya Gaffney, who's superintendent in Aldine, has stood up this family student experience. How do we ensure that our customer service, that the experience that our families having is both positive, welcoming, honest, and also curious? And then what does this bridge look like? So this is a great time to be optimistic. I am so optimistic about the future of education. I certainly believe we have to challenge and sort of fight the prevailing wisdom, but I am super convinced and super excited with the possibilities that lay ahead for this work in education.
Well, I'm so excited to hear you extolling the virtues of my friend LaTanya Gaffney. She is doing wonderful work. Dr. What's inspiring you right now?
I'm sorry, was that directed at me?
I'm sorry, yes, I was asking what is inspiring you?
Well, I'll tell you that we've been encouraged by the fact that in several of our school districts, there's been a willingness to consider a specific approach. And I'll give you an example in the form of the development of what we call algebra academies, with focus in the middle schoolers, really gaining that capability of mastering Algebra 1 before they get into high school, so that then they're able to open their vistas to a lot more of the advanced mathematics. And as everybody realizes, that ability to master mathematics, and particularly algebra, is critical to that post-secondary preparation and success. And we're seeing an equivalent type of interest in doing the same thing with English and language arts, which is critical. We've got to have a much stronger mastery with respect to both of those disciplines if that success is going to be assured. So what's encouraging is the fact that, as we've all been talking about, we're not trying to accomplish the same thing that we're seeking to achieve by doing the same thing that's been done over and over without any adjustments. And I think the pandemic has assisted in being able to highlight just how significant the gaps are and why we need to really push ourselves rapidly to close them, not only because of the present circumstance, but on an ongoing basis for the output that we really want to see occur within the system of education. So those are all indicators to me that we're moving in the right direction.
Thank you so much. I see Dr. Bob has popped up, so that means we're out of time. So thank you so much. This has been an outstanding panel. And Dr. Bob, do you have any questions for us?
I want to ask you a question, Sharon. It occurs to me that for life to get back to normal and for us to have economic progress, we need our teachers to be supported. They are the linchpin to us getting back to normal, to families getting back to normal. And people tend to think that teachers live in this world that's different than our own. And so we see the Great Resignation. Teachers are thinking the same things. We see teachers on strike in Seattle. They're dissatisfied. But I wonder if the very nature of a teacher shortage, which isn't going away anytime, if that's going to be enough to bring attention to the fact that we need to do more for our teachers. What do you think, Sharon?
I hope so, but it's going to have to be a paradigm shift. We're going to have to treat teachers as the professionals that they are. And as the keeper of the flame, if you will, of our families, our workforce, we can't do without teachers, and we have to treat them in that way.
Yeah, a lot of work to be done, though. Thank you, Sharon. What a great panel. Thank you very much, all of you. Thank you so much for what you do. Let's move to the next segment of our summit, and I'm bringing Alex Shub in. Alex is the Chief Executive Officer, the CEO of the School Empowerment Network. And Alex, you doing well today?
Yeah, great, thanks.
Very good, very good. And so I just want to spend the next 15 minutes or so talking with Alex a little bit. And Josue, I'm going to ask you to mute your video. And so, Alex, you know, we're coming out of this pandemic, supposedly, right? And one of the things that happened, I remember at the beginning of the pandemic, people kept saying things like, well, I hope this is the wake-up call for us to really do more with our schools. And then everything devolved into mask wearing and vaccinations, and no one was really talking about learning much anymore. Do we think, though, that coming out of this pandemic, and we're talking about it today, and you and I know there have been conversations nationally, is this enough of a catalyst for us to get back to the work of education reform and making sure that every child is educated well?
I certainly hope so. I mean, if this isn't enough of a catalyst, I don't know what is, although the fact that the previous results in which so many students in our educational system are being underserved, particularly students living in poverty and students of color, the fact that that wasn't enough of a catalyst is concerning at best. So I think there, again, is great opportunity, as was mentioned in one of the earlier panels, the fact that some of the challenges that are often limited to some of our more disadvantaged students and families, to those students and families on the margins, the fact that those same challenges are now being faced by families with more political power, to white affluent families, I think provides opportunity for us all to speak with one voice and improve conditions for all students in our educational system.
Yeah. You've done a lot of work on education reform across the country. Are there things that you see happening? And I know you and I have talked about what's going on in Springfield, Massachusetts, and in Texas. We never like to use Massachusetts as an example, but Springfield's so far away from Boston, right? And I wonder if there are examples around the country that you see like, wow, these things could really work in Texas. We could frame them in a particular way, and they could do a lot to help our children.
Yeah, the work that we're doing in Springfield is around building leadership pipelines. And we're focused on leadership pipelines because we had a really interesting opportunity in New York City where we were opening schools at scale. So hundreds of schools were opened over a 10-year period. And we really got to trace the arc of impact. Some of those schools were opened by organizations that had a really excellent school plan on paper. And I think you can trace the same arc with some charter orgs where in the early years, their schools were getting outsized positive results. And then as the number of schools that they managed came to scale to be similar to the size of, say, smaller districts, their results in aggregate started to regress towards the mean. What do we learn from that? It's not the quality of the school plan on paper itself that is the solution. And I think we've seen the same lack of impact with a lot of other really in theory, effective initiatives, providing better curricular resources, better professional development to teachers, whatever it might be. It doesn't necessarily lead to better results in all circumstances. And what we found to be the main driving factor of what made the new schools best was the quality of the school leader. And so that's why we are doubling down, or all of our efforts are around building visionary leaders who understand how to make real opportunity for every kid to be successful in their school. So when we talk about quality leaders, we focus on a few things. First of all, is an orientation towards ownership and responsibility for student outcomes. And what I mean by that is a real flip of, I think, what a typical, or like when people talk about getting back to business as usual, which doesn't work, excuse me, I think that's the mindset in which it's the school system's job to put the information out there and it's the kids and families' job to show up and do everything that's needed to learn. And we're flipping that mindset to say it's the school's job to make sure the kid has learned it. And if what we're doing is not helping the kid learn it today, we better try something different tomorrow. And if that doesn't work, try something else and something else until the students are successful. That's a very high bar in terms of effort, ingenuity, creativity, and commitment. But that's really what is required for leaders to be successful in helping kids, again, who are not being well served by other aspects of our society.
What's the big obstacle to that happening? What's the biggest obstacle to leaders that have been trained well, but to their success and to the student success that should come from them being strong leaders?
Unfortunately, I think it's in our educational system, the pressures that people are most responsive to are not aligned to the needs of the students. So in a lot of circumstances, not all, but a lot of circumstances, you see the threat of litigious scenarios, the pressure of political alignment with boards, the compliance orientation, frankly, as what enables people to move up the ladder. So who's most likely to get named principal of X high school? The person who's going to keep the superintendent off the back page of the newspaper for having some controversial thing happen at the school. The trains are running on time. The teachers are reading the curriculum. Nobody's complaining. Not who's got the most innovative approach that's most likely to turn these unsuccessful results on their head and give kids who typically don't have an opportunity a real shot. So we're looking at the wrong inputs or the wrong characteristics in our leaders when we're grooming people for these opportunities in the future, and essentially just recreating the same circumstance that we then complain about or wish we were not in.
Yeah. What have you seen work nationally in terms of districts not just being sort of mediocre, right? I mean, sort of doing fine and not rocking the boat. I mean, I see this when I look at the data for districts in Texas. There are plenty of districts that are just fine, but they're not doing the extraordinary work that they probably could be doing.
Yeah, it's all about distributed leadership. We all know, or I think we're all familiar with the concept that those closest to the children, closest to the challenges, closest to the community are best poised to make the decisions for how best to serve them. And yet how many of our school systems, our school districts are actually set up to empower those folks who are closest to really make those impactful decisions. So many of the well-meaning or well-intended initiatives that are put in place to raise the floor of expectations actually take all of the ownership and decision-making out of the process, again, turn principals into middle managers as opposed to visionary leaders of their community. And then who wants to be a principal? So the distributed leadership starts at the top with the superintendent. Is the superintendent willing to empower their most successful educators to make differentiated decisions at the school level? Then are the principals trained to build their team leaders and their teachers to make impactful decisions at the classroom level or at the departmental level? And then are teachers empowered to make decisions for how best to work with individual kids and families to meet their needs? Because as I said earlier, this is not a one-size-fits-all business. And we know that when families and students feel personally and individually attended to, that is when they're most likely to be satisfied with their school experience.
Yeah. When you think about us as an education system nationally coming out of the pandemic, you know, I think my biggest worry, I'm going to ask you what your biggest worry is, but my biggest worry, I think, is that all those pre-K and early education kids that just aren't getting up to speed, right? They're not getting their head start. What is your biggest worry as we come out of this?
My biggest worry is that people are overly infatuated with the power of virtual learning, and that they're going to look to replace the teaching force with the cost-effective measure of having one virtual teacher be able to serve X number of students. And while I think there are obviously some kinds of financial appeals to that approach, to me, our profession is about relationships. People, I mean, for most of human history, people have learned in a direct mentorship setup. I think we can all think of that teacher who had the biggest impact in our lives as someone who we really had a personal connection to, who we looked up to, who inspired us. I don't see any way to replace that. So my fear is that with the continued drumbeat of the power of algorithmic prediction of what anybody needs, if I get one more pop-up ad of whatever my wife was just looking at on the internet, I don't know what I'm going to do. But anyway, like applying that to our children's learning experience feels like a real red herring and actually a dangerous road to go down.
Yeah, the TikTok of education, right? Using the algorithm. What is when you think about school reform, and you and I both would say leadership, right, is going to be the more important thing. When we do studies of these high performing schools that are serving high poverty students, that we call them gold ribbon schools, of which there are not enough of, right, and certainly in Texas. But we see, you know, the leadership is is important. We see things like creating the culture of high expectations, the time on task. For you, after leadership, what's the next important thing? What is it that, and a lot of these are implemented by the leader, by the good leader, but what else sort of contributes to that turnaround?
Yeah, I'm going to really describe an outcome that has a lot of different inputs that could make this happen. But it's the joy of learning. School has become a deadly place for so many people, a deadly boring, I should say, or just like something we have to do. It's that way for a lot of the adults where they're like, well, what's the mandate from my leadership? Okay, turn the page in the textbook, implement the lesson. Kids, it's, well, you got to do this to jump through the hoop, to get the certificate, to get access to this, to then. The joy is absent. Now, the joy is present in a lot of elements of school, but they're often the extracurriculars. And I don't see any reason why that same level of participation and excitement and enjoyment can't and shouldn't be present in all of the learning opportunities. Now, that would require a lot of reorientation akin to the kind of mindset shift I described in the beginning, owning student outcomes. Well, let's own whether students are enjoying school as adults and make sure we're designing our classes to really engage them thoughtfully and prepare them for success in the future. I think there's still a significant disconnect, and a lot of pockets are becoming aware of this in terms of like workforce development. I often use chemistry as the counter example here, but no disrespect to chemists, a number in my family, but like, I don't really know that everyone needs to know how to balance a chemistry equation to be able to access a white collar job. Certainly many of my friends and colleagues, myself included, don't use that knowledge on a day-to-day basis. So again, it's not to say that we shouldn't be trying to provide a broad base of education to all of our students. Of course we should, but there's a lot of choices being made as we decide what students need to go deepest on. And those don't seem very well aligned to, again, the outcomes that we're looking for. So I think if we can be flexible in thinking about what it is we're preparing kids to do, help make sure that those things align to what kids are interested in, what kids know they're going to want to do or need to do later to be successful in life, we can then make school that much more purposeful and then hopefully joyful, where everyone wants to be there instead of just having to be there.
I love that, the joy of learning. This morning in our press conference, Alex, you talked about a couple of examples of Texas schools that you thought were doing some extraordinary work. Can you share one or two of those with us in our last minute?
Yeah, so first let me just say that, you know, in our work with TEA, we have the opportunity to engage in a year-long fellowship with principals or principals in training where they develop the design for their new schools. And that time is critical because it's not just that we want deeply committed visionary leaders to head up their schools. They need to be able to articulate how their vision manifests in particular technical moves that the folks in their community are going to make. Every school in the country has a poster that says, All our scholars will achieve. All of our students will be treated with respect. Like, great, I love that poster, but what does that mean I'm supposed to do when so-and-so is having a bad day, or when student B doesn't understand the math problem I put in front of them? If I don't have a clear playbook for remediating that circumstance and developing that student's ability, then I don't know, take that poster and make a nice paper airplane out of it. So the schools that I highlighted this morning are very good at that connection between vision and practical application. So at Wester Elementary, a school where a number of the kids have typically come in behind in math and reading.
And where is Wester Elementary?
Sorry, Wester is in Lubbock. Thank you. And
Okay,
it's led by Principal Stacy Hurst. And I always mention the principals because, as I say, for us,
Yep.
they're the leader of this work. Stacy has galvanized her community around using data-based instruction, but in a really live and proactive way. So, you know, a lot of people were talking about data-driven instruction for a long time, but it was maybe a quarterly assessment, or anyway, you had your data walls, but students were grouped in aggregate. We're talking about every kid as an index card in their sort of hive mind build. It's actually a building in the middle of their campus where they have an index card for every kid. And those are updated regularly based on regular assessments. And then the kids are regrouped. And then the instruction the teachers provide is adjusted based on those groupings. So the kids are actually being met where they are. That's very different than saying, okay, we'll give out assessments, put all these kids need something more, and everyone gets the same thing. Young Women's Leadership Academy in Aldine, led by Principal Jerica Jackson. They've significantly adjusted the way they think about helping kids catch up. And that's not just by giving extra time that feels like detention. It's extra time targeted, again, to the data identified needs that kids have, but doing it in a really community-driven, inspirational way. They have camps where the kids work together to make sure they're all catching up. They have Saturday tutorials where kids get one-on-one support. They have after-school sessions. They have breakfast competitions. And I'll tell you, if you go to that school, the intellectual energy and collective drive to succeed that's coming from the kids is incredible.
You see the joy of learning.
Yes, exactly.
Wow.
And it starts with the principal
Yeah.
and the ability to bring that to life for the kids through the teachers, through the structures that she encourages them to do.
Alex, I'm seeing a TED Talk, Leadership and the Joy of Learning in the Future for you. So this is, you like it? Yeah.
From you to Ted. Yeah.
Alex, thank you very much for all the work that you're doing. Thank you for being a part of the keynote interview today. And I hope to work with you in the future, man.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you for having me. And thanks to everybody else for being part of this community. It's really a great day.
Very good. Thank you. Alex Shub is with School Empowerment Network. He's the CEO. Thank you so much, Alex. All right, let's go to our next panel. And we're going to keep on with high-performing schools. And Claire Dutre, who is one of our key members at Children at Risk. Claire, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. I'm enjoying the conversation around education.
Yeah, very good. Well, I'm going to let you take it away because you have a fantastic panel to talk about some of these high-performing schools. I think we have a number of great principals. So I'll turn it over to you. And Claire, take it away.
Awesome. Thank you. Yes, I'm excited today to spotlight some high-performing schools around our nation and hear about the tactics we can implement in districts across Texas. Starting off, we have William Clark, who's the founder and superintendent of STEP Charter School. Welcome, William.
Thank you.
And we have Josue Covarrubias, the principal at Barr Middle School. Welcome, Josue.
Hello.
And finally, we have Carol May, who was the recipient of a 2020 National Blue Ribbon School Principal at H.R. McCall Elementary School. Welcome. All right, I'm excited to talk to these three principals and leaders in these schools that are high performing. We want to look at kind of what we've been talking about as the pandemic undoubtedly shifted education and unveiled as well as created learning gaps in our schools and districts. What your school or what are some specific programs your school implemented that you saw help students best succeed in these unprecedented times? So anyone can start.
I guess I'll go ahead and start. Thank you for having me. First off, we're here in Houston, based in Houston, and I enjoyed all the other panelists before. I've been listening the whole time, so I really appreciate you guys putting this together. We began to look what we had and where we needed to go. We focused a lot on, with the additional ESSER funds that we received, and it was quite substantial. We almost doubled our number of teacher assistants, and we began doing pullouts while the teacher assistants was here, almost around the clock while they were here. And we felt like that targeted, we were able to pull them out by ability levels, sometimes by personalities, that kind of stuff. But we felt like that had a significant impact on what we did, in addition to trying to keep time on task in the classrooms, what we're doing.
And then I'll start with individual questions. Josue, teachers and staff at schools right now are experiencing incredible burnout. So if they haven't left the classroom, they've entered burnt out from the last 2 years, leading to national teacher shortages across the nation. With your extensive personal experience in professional learning communities, multi-tiered systems, professional development support, or areas of support, how have you seen support and collaboration between teachers, staff, and community partners be strong tools in maintaining retention rates in districts?
Yes, thank you. Also a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for having me a part of this. I'm not based in Texas. I'm from Nebraska, and although there's probably some similarities, also some differences that we've seen, obviously, arise from across the country. We were both fortunate and unfortunate to be able to return shortly after the shutdown, the fall of 2020. Obviously with a lot of restrictions in place, but we were in school every single day, starting that fall of 2020. So although we were able to continue, for the most part, regular instruction inside of our building and in our district, we definitely saw the effects of a larger number of students continuing in the virtual setting. We saw obviously the effect of students being quarantined at different times because of an increased exposure to being in the school setting with larger number of students. And obviously being in that building caused a different level of burnout, right, with our teachers. Even just the lack of the ability to see kids' faces that they were used to seeing every day. Intermittent gaps that occurred from kids being out of school for 2 weeks at a time during quarantines, or transitioning back and forth between a virtual setting to that regular setting when kids were moving between those, definitely caused some of that additional stress. And then the burnout, across the country is something that we haven't been able to avoid either. I mean, we're feeling that on a day-to-day basis. And we're definitely seeing that at the end of each school year when it's time for teachers to decide if they're returning or not. I will tell you though that within that system, or within our systems, professional learning communities have probably been the thing that have kept our people coming back the most. And a lot of that coming from the ability to lean on each other, the ability to be able to work in collaboration with other, content experts that one are there to support you through all of those difficult situations, emotionally, professionally, whatever they may be, but also that you're not doing the work in isolation. So when you're struggling with any given situation, whether it be because of the pandemic, personal, professional things going on, there's a consistent common time where you can get together with other professionals that are teaching similar content areas. You can be very aligned in both the learning expectations that you're preparing for kids, the way that you're verifying that learning on a day-to-day basis, but also just the ability to be able to lean on each other emotionally when that that feeling of that burnout increases. So having those professional learning communities established in a way that allows for that common time, allows for a structure of how that process works, so that it's very focused, but also provides the opportunity to get into some other topics that are constantly pervasive in education, really provides that system for our teachers. Within multi-tiered systems of support, we're able to now collaboratively impact how our students are both at tier 1 learning what we need them to learn, but also when students are struggling, be able to, within a group of other professionals, say, how are we going to together help this student be successful? What are we noticing? What does the data show us that this student is needing additional support in? And how do we all play a role in helping that student, whether it's academically or behaviorally? And then having a system in place for how do we respond so that as our keynote speaker mentioned earlier, it's not just identification of through data, but it's also a system of how do we respond so that we're not spinning our wheels as we work through that process. So those systems really have been not necessarily what does away with that burnout, but it's a good way of battling some of the burnout that people feel by having some things in place that make the day-to-day things that are difficult a little bit easier each time.
Yeah, I love that. As Alex Shub was saying, leadership is very important, and you can see that if you don't have a strong community in front of the students in the classrooms, that's when you can start to see gaps happen in school. So it's awesome to hear what your school is doing to build that community. And then shifting more a little to the students, Carol, your school was recently under your leadership recognized as a 2020 National Blue Ribbon School, as mentioned earlier. Congratulations. What strategies do you believe made the greatest impact in your school community to make your school reach that exemplary level?
Thank you. I want to say hello, and I've enjoyed the discussion that's taken place so far. Same here. We are in Illinois, so I'm about 45 minutes outside of Chicago in a suburb. It was very exciting to be awarded the Blue Ribbon in our school, the first one ever in our school district. Our teachers, the way that they were able to achieve this, you know, they believe in a strong core instruction. Though many other schools do, we also believe in implementing the evidence-based curriculum, as well as focusing on best teaching practices. So our educators, you know, we have a system of making sure that they are doing daily exit tickets or common formative assessments, and they are checking on students' learning daily, and they're making changes as needed based on that. We also have like a school-wide system of doing, we call it WIN, it stands for What I Need. And it's a time that's blocked out, you know, for intervention or enrichment. So that's a piece that we sometimes miss. We do have some students who need to keep moving because they're already at that higher level. So during that period, we have all hands on deck. We want to make sure that the teachers are implementing this intervention or enrichment with fidelity. So we pull all of the support in the school, the paraprofessionals. If it's STEM teacher or PE teacher, we pull anyone who's in the building to help support with this intervention. And this will help our students, you know, be successful.
Awesome, thank you. I like that you incorporate what the students need and meet it at that certain time to adjust for enrichment versus intervention. And then moving to another honor, William, at Step School, you were recently recognized as the safest school in Harris County. How do you guarantee that safe learning environment for your teachers and students, and how have you seen it benefit learning?
Well, I can't ever say we guarantee it. I try to stay away from that a little bit, but at our school, everything we try to do is we just try to decrease the probability of something happening. And so that's really probably twofold. We try to have a plan from the moment our school opens at 7:30 in the morning and school starts at 8:30, and then we go all the way to 5 o'clock with our aftercare program. And from the time they come in until the time they come out, in 30-minute segments, we plan out accordingly. What is each student going to do? Where should they go? What should they be doing? And break it down like this so that we're always trying to be proactive in terms of our safety issues instead of reactive going forward. So there's always a continual plan, particularly when they go outside, playground area, the recess, PE. We look for the times where the incidences are likely to increase, and then we try to systematically make a plan on how to do that. That it even starts with how do they enter the playground area? How do they enter where they're going to play? If they come in a certain way, they're more likely to be an incident. So we really try to psychologically break it down And if we have an incident, we have an incident. But tomorrow we're not going to have an incident. We're going to figure out what went wrong. And then we also, through a structure of our school, we try to be very, we try to eliminate problems before they happen. Like we're a smaller school, so I guess we're fortunate in some ways. We can do things like we like all of our students eat in the classrooms, so we don't have any cafeteria issues because we don't have a cafeteria. And because that's, if you talk to the leaders, that's an issue. The cafeteria could be a very noisy place where incidents can occur. All of our bathrooms we've redesigned to be single use, so one student goes in, one student comes out. And so we never have any bathroom issues because there's never two kids in the bathroom. So we try to eliminate those sort of things. We try to reconfigure our playgrounds. Some are too big, some are too small. Anything we can try to do to reduce safety issues throughout the school.
Awesome, thank you. And going off, you mentioned after school programs. I know it was just in a blurb, but it's important all three of your schools recognize that academics are of high importance, but its student needs holistic success. And as Shub mentioned, they come in with a bunch of different things that they kind of hold on their back. And so as the WIN program or after school program, what are different implementations or activities, resources that you give to students outside of your classroom to ensure that holistic success?
I can speak a little in regards to that. For the first time, we're seeing students who didn't attend school at all the whole 2 years. So I have kids that are showing up in second grade, and this is their first time being in school. So we had to brainstorm together, and what we're doing currently, we're having some before school and after school programs. We did have a summer school program this past summer, and we targeted groups of students who had low attendance during that year once we returned in hybrid. And then once we were back in full learning, we still had some students who had poor attendance. So we target some of those students to be a part of our summer school program. We also provided supports for families. So we've made some home visit and just meeting with families, providing resources for them. And then we also did a lot around social emotional. So we implemented a school-wide social emotional program. And we have another special agency coming in to help teachers implement that in the classroom. And we're also planning parent groups and some resources for parents around social emotional. So some of these pieces that are all, connected to the pandemic, we're like slowly trying to, get back where we need to by, trying to problem solve and make sure that we're providing these programs. And definitely the co-curricular, the after school soccer, and they're so anxious to get back into that. And that's another piece that draws, families to feel more comfortable in coming in.
I could add as well, I love what, Ms. Carroll talked about with, providing those opportunities for our families outside of school. We have also seen, an increase of students coming in with interrupted schooling gaps. But even the kids that have been here, we're seeing those social emotional needs of kids have increased because of the pandemic, because of, the use of technology and everything that comes with that. And so we too have work to partner with some community agencies, work through some grant funding to be able to provide in-house counseling support for our kids that works through this grant, that works with individual family insurance, whatever it may be that is best suited for them, but provided here at school so that kids aren't missing extensive time where they're needing to leave to go to these appointments and then return. We have these mental health specialists coming into our building to be able to provide that, as well as some virtual support in that area as well. And then providing those opportunities for kids to find joy in the things that are at school beyond what's happening in the classroom. And also our WIN time, it's primarily academically focused, but also we are able to provide some enrichment opportunities for kids that are meeting proficiency at our different priority standards, where we can incorporate, some of those after school type of opportunities into the school day, where kids are getting some opportunities to be in some activities, some clubs that maybe after school does not work for them. We do provide a lot of after-school opportunities beyond, your sports and things that interscholastic activities that kids may participate in. We have, I think in our building, we have 700 kids or so. In our building, we offer 25 different clubs that kids can participate in. And the majority of those clubs have either an academic focus that some of our staff are passionate about different areas that they want to provide some additional enrichment opportunities for kids. But we also offer a club proposal process that kids can just say, hey, I'm interested in this, and I'd love to participate in this with other kids that are interested in this at school. And all we require is that kids figure out who is going to be that sponsor, look for one of those staff sponsors that wants to help with that. We pay those sponsors through some ESSER funds as well, that we have some funds built up for, so that they're not just giving up of their free time to do that. And then we get those clubs up and running, and when we see the joy that kids have in participating in something that is interesting to them, that then translates into that interest in being at school. And so those things are critical, for us. We also have a social emotional learning curriculum that we've implemented into our advisory time, that our school counselors help provide some additional training for our teachers. But we also know that social emotional learning and social emotional skills come from the everyday experiences and everyday interactions that kids have with our staff. And so we start our year, every single year, we start our year by really focusing on clear expectations for students. And we spend the first week of school completely focused on how do we ensure that kids know what's expected of them while building some of those connections, relationships in the classroom. And so those things are critical for making sure that your day is running, smoothly, but also bringing that joy into the school day. And so really providing those different opportunities for kids during the school day and outside of the school day as well.
Awesome, thank you. And as Alex Shub was saying, the leaders, so you all are the most important stakeholders in education that we don't listen to as much and should be. And with this national attention and lens kind of pressuring more in education in Harris County, I know, William, you could speak to that as Texas as a whole, and then Josue and Carol can speak more in a national lens in your certain areas. What do you see as a leader in your district, in your schools, as the actual issue or most pressing issue in classrooms affecting students and teachers? And who can we bring in those conversations to make sure that solutions are activated?
Sorry, you want to start with me? Yes.
Yes. If you could speak starting off on Texas, that'd be great.
What is the most pressing issue right now, would you say? Is that what you said? For us, we look at life a little differently over here at this school, but we just need to, and I think Alex, a speaker might have mentioned it before either, but we just need to take responsibility for the kids learning in the classroom. And that's what we try to do here. We can keep blaming the situation on the COVID and what's happened previously, but that's not going to get us anywhere unless we realize, okay, this is where we're at now, and we've got to move forward. So one of the issues I've got to continue to try to get my teachers to believe in is that we can change things here with what we have. We have what we have, and so I'm trying to continue to inspire them that way. That I know it's easy to when you're teaching and you're down to blame the child for for not learning this great lesson plan you had, or for blaming the parent for not doing their part. But I try to instill with everybody here that the only the only part's under control is you. So as long as you keep looking back at yourself, then you're not going to then you won't be again disappointed sometimes with the lack of effort on the other end. So that to me, that's what we try to do, is it realize that I know we had a pandemic, but here we are, and we've got to fix this with what we have.
I can jump in next. For us, I definitely have to say is getting and keeping qualified classroom teachers. It was very, very, very difficult. Getting teachers, I had some that retired, and we had to start the school year off in a couple of classrooms, no teachers. So, that is definitely a issue that is, at the front of where we're trying to problem solve and make sure that we're building a culture and climate in our school. We're providing the staff development for teachers. We're finding ways to be creative, to pay them for before and after school programs or whatever it is. We did a lot, that first year after returning from COVID, we did like every Friday, something special in the teacher's lounge. For the teachers, whatever I can do, I want to empower them to do the job that they need to do. And I see my role, as, a servant to them so that they are able to educate the students. And so it's a very difficult time right now. So I am like just so grateful to our teachers. And I think until you go through a time period like this, you really, it gives you that great appreciation. So that is one of the pieces that was very, very pressing for us. And I'm just hoping, to maintain the individuals that I was able to get this school year, and hopefully they'll come back and not leave the teaching profession. So whatever I can do to make just this culture and climate in my school and the school district, a very positive one, a family, building those relationship with them. And, the students are here, the parents are ready, we just need to try to find a way to keep these teachers here in the school. So that was one of the top issues for us.
I mean, I would second both of those sentiments. I mean, I think we're all feeling all of that pinch, across the country of both of these previously mentioned issues. I would add that a third, I think is, and this is, I think, pervasive in education, but I think it's pervasive in a lot of places, is people are comfortable with the status quo. People are comfortable with getting to a place where you feel good about, how things are. And so one thing that we try to focus on constantly whenever we're providing professional development, when we're going into classrooms and we're providing feedback, we're doing trend walks, whatever it may be, is this idea of this moral imperative that kids come to us at different levels and we cannot control how they come to us, but we can control how they leave. And so this idea of what are we doing on a day-to-day basis that moves our kids forward a little bit every single day. We have this quote that we use constantly here, and the quote is simple: is you're perfectly designed to get the results that you're getting. Your building is perfectly designed to get the results that you're getting. And if you're happy with those results, let's continue doing everything as we have been. But if we're not happy with those results and we want better, we have to do something different. We have to do better in order to get better. So this idea of good is the enemy of great. We can't get comfortable. And in a time of this pandemic, when everything is stressful, when everything causes additional strife in the lives of teachers, is it sometimes feels good to get in that comfort level of I'm doing pretty well, but we can't let our foot off the gas of that moral imperative that good is not good enough for our kids because they need better. They need to leave us better than they were when they got to us. And we're the gatekeepers of that as educators, because in 3 years when they leave middle school in our building, we are no longer in control of what happens after that, but we better do a better job of preparing them for that next step than we have in the past. And so really it's just making sure that even though we're stressed, even though that burnout is there, that we're still focusing on what are the most effective things that we can do, that we do control. How are we using that data to respond so that we're not spinning our wheels, so that moral imperative is something that we're responding to every day.
Awesome, thank you. And just like you said, we're all feeling that burnout in schools, from leadership down to students, especially. I think Harrison Peters put it in the chat earlier that a study found that 80% of principals responded that they are concerned about their own mental health. I'm not sure if that was pre or post pandemic, but I think we can all account to that being prevalent in our schools right now. What would you say, any of y'all can answer this, is 3 key factors of what's making a great principal right now, and how would you encourage leaders right now that might be feeling that burnout to remain resilient in maintaining their school community and enhancing student success?
So I would say 3 things that our administrative team really tries to focus on. and there's so many that you could focus on, but 3 things that we really try to focus on is clarity, transparency, and vulnerability. If you're not clear about your expectations, it's difficult to ensure that people are going to get there. And so that's with everything that we do, the communication that we provide, that it's not vague, that we're making sure that we're checking, are we providing clear communication? So it's not a one, broadcasting method and expect that people got it. It's the follow-up that goes with that. It's the ensuring that 3D communication happens in a 3D channel and not a 2D channel. So if I need to have a conversation with you, that I'm making a decision about, does this need to be a face-to-face conversation, or can I send this in a text message or an email? If I'm sending information in an email that should have been a face-to-face conversation, that's going to create lack of clarity. That's going to create distrust. And that then creates issues for you later as an administrator. And so that clarity is critical. Transparency, with that, it goes along with that clarity, but it's specific to owning the decisions that we make, whether it's a good decision or a bad decision. Your staff does not expect you to be perfect. And as a matter of fact, the closer that you appear to be perfect, the less trust that they're going to have for you, so that you're owning those decisions and that you're clear and transparent about, this is why we are doing these things. How do we ensure that our staff are clear about our vision that we have as a building leader? And so how are we providing that transparency in everything that we do, making sure that people understand the why behind every decision, but behind everything that you're asking them to do. And then third, that vulnerability of we're all human. We're all feeling that stress. I'm here with you. We're going to figure it out together. When you're feeling that stress, how can I help you? So that we can work with each other. We have a great program in our district that's an employee assistance program, where every single person in our district that's employed by our district has 6 free sessions to a mental health counselor. And we put that out there every single year, but the vulnerability to be able to say, like, this isn't just something that's there, it's actually something useful. So using those yourself and being vulnerable with people and saying, like, hey, I'm feeling this stress just as much as you are, and here's some assistance. Here is some help that we can provide for you that should be used by everybody. And so how are you being vulnerable with when things are difficult? You don't have to put on a brave face and not share that reality with people. Things have been difficult, and we're going to still work together to get there. Every day is a struggle. Every day is a part of what we're trying to do, but we're in a marathon. And how do we all come together in order to do that? And I think those are the things that our staffs are looking for in us as leaders, so that they feel that they can follow along in those visions.
Awesome. And we do actually have a question from the chat. One of our viewers wants to know, how can we ask parents and school boards to be nicer to teachers or show empathy to the classrooms and schools, as legal matters kind of create burnout and pressures in our classrooms?
I can jump in on that. I think inviting them into the schools and letting them participate and do visits and see what a teacher has to go through on a daily basis. I think, letting them be, the teacher for the day, like a half a day type of situation. And then they could kind of understand and have that compassion and understand the work that they do. I think also, like, some of the work that teachers do in PLCs, inviting, if it's a parent or a board member in that planning and seeing how detailed it is. I know it's difficult to, have them participate when we're, planning around data and analyzing, and planning in that sense. But at the same time, I think there are pieces that they can jump in and understand and say, oh my goodness, how detailed is it? Looking at those standards and, assessing whether or not students are able, or were they able to master what you taught on that particular day. And then also, as administrator, I would definitely like to invite them to participate in, like, some of the hiring, like, to see what that's like, to feel, we have like an Apple Track system. And when you go in there and you look for candidates and how difficult it is to, get a candidate to apply, and then walk walk with me through this whole process, and then you'll see how special each one of these teachers are. And when we finally get them to sign, we want to keep them. So if they understood those components and pieces, I think it would be easier for them, to develop some of those relationships and to help build that.
And yeah, I would just, those are good points. I was also add too, just be flexible with the teacher on when you contact them and when they can speak, because if you say, sometimes a parent will catch a teacher leaving the parking lot, they're not prepared to speak about their child. And so email, find a time, and I'll say, wait till the planning time, because then that teacher is ready and can give you their full attention. So sometimes it's just best to hold off on questions, situations, particularly if you're upset about something. I always say, I always caution people, wait a while, or think about it some before you respond, because some parents can be quite guarded and very, can be quite temperamental about their child, because that's the one that is their loved one. But if you can try to hold back a little bit and think about things before you contact a teacher about an incident, that would be helpful too.
Yes, thank you all. That is all the time we have, but I want to thank our panelists both for being here today and what you're doing to impact so many students in our national education system.
Thank you, Claire, very much. And Josue and Carol from Nebraska and Illinois. Well, that's far away. And Josue, where in Nebraska are you from now? Where is it?
Grand Island, Nebraska, right in the center.
Yeah, right. And Carol, what's the name of the town that you're in actually outside of Chicago?
We are in Waukegan. It's right outside of Gurnee, where Great America is.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Very good. Well, guys, thank you very much for the work that you do. And William, nice to see you again. And thank you guys all for the great work that you do as leaders in our schools. And so that brings us to the end of our summit today. Great panelists. We want to thank you guys very much. Also want to invite you to the State of Latino Children, October 15th, 2022, this year, October 15th. We'd love for you guys to be able to join us as well, sponsored by AmeriGroup, Amazon. And feel free also to do the survey. I think we put, again, a survey right here. It is our Survey Monkey to get your response to how we did today. And then I'll end with this little thought, which is we're not going to have change unless all of us sort of focus on this legislative process. This is an opportune time for us to put pressure on our state legislature, on school boards, to say teachers are important, our schools are important. This is a unique opportunity in history to really drive home this point. If we want a successful future for all of our society, it's right now, it's our children. So thank you all very much, and we'll see you next time for Texas Family Leadership Council on Children at Risk. I'm Bob Sanborn. Take care. Bye-bye.